Okay, so we have to pay attention to what the Secretary General of the UN says. You know, he's a big guy, powerful guy, and his message tends to have some impact. And I've made many points on this across my courses, especially on subseasonal to seasonal forecasting and early warnings, because all global warming is local and you need action plans and early warnings at hyperlocal scales. Nonetheless, there can be general strategy at the global level that can coordinate observation systems, early warning systems, dissemination of information, frameworks for extreme heat action, and so on. So this just came out. Antonio Guterres says the world must rise to the challenge of rising temperatures. Very good. There is a lot of text. I'm going to just chop and read a few main points. Introduction goes something like this. Extreme heat is deadly and disrupts economies and societies. Model estimates show that between 2000 and 2019, approximately 489,000 heat-related deaths occurred each year, with 45% of these in Asia, 36% in Europe. Heat exposure related to loss in labor capacity resulted in average potential income losses equivalent to US dollar 863 billion in 2022. In the past 100 days alone, this report just came out, we witnessed heat-related deaths in countries from Saudi Arabia to India, heat stroke warnings across Japan, schools closing in Bangladesh and Philippines, and the Philippines, severe heat warnings issued by governments in Southeast Europe, and new temperature records across the United States. There is no doubt that with increased greenhouse gases, global warming, you are going to get increased global mean temperatures. The trick, of course, is to understand where it is increasing. The Middle East is warming relatively fast, the Mediterranean is as well, but India shows large regions of cooling. That doesn't mean heat waves don't occur, because you may have a background cooling trend, but you can still have spikes in temperatures and so on. So it's always tricky to see how we can forecast these things, and models are pretty good at doing regional scale temperatures, but the skill at local scales is not that great. But you can do downscaling exercises, and there are good forecast models which have good skills as well in terms of regional scale temperatures and rainfall, humidity, because humidity and temperature often compound the heat stress index and so on and so forth. Globally, 2.41 billion workers, 70% of the working population, are exposed to excessive heat. Exposures are okay, but when you say numbers like this, 489,000 heat-related deaths, National Disaster Management Agency in India will tell you that attributing deaths to heat waves is very tricky, because they exacerbate pre-existing conditions. But often you look at excessive deaths, so you look at average deaths expected around that period and then see if that's spiked and try to attribute them to heat waves. Do we really need to worry about attributing deaths? Well, sometimes investments in early warnings and hydration centers, shelters, free public transportation, and urban action plans for heat wave and so on depend on having these sorts of numbers. So it's always tricky to see whether we can actively attribute, or we just have to deal with the risk without having to worry about death. So this results in 22.85 million non-fatal injuries, so morbidities which affect productivity and so on, and 818,970 deaths annually. Okay. Regions with the highest workforce exposure to excessive heat: Africa, Arab states, Asia, and the Pacific. So you can see the numbers are pretty large: 92.9% of the workforce, 83.6% of the workforce, 74.7% of the workforce in these places. That's not small. Regions with the most rapidly increasing workforce exposure as opposed to what's already happening: Europe and Central Asia. There are also details. Mortality in Europe tends to be higher than in tropical countries, and there is always a debate about whether people are genetically or otherwise adapted to heat waves better in tropical countries which have background states that are much warmer and so on. Regions with the highest proportion of occupational injuries attributable to excessive heat: Africa 7.2%, Americas 6.7% of all occupational injuries. Regions with the most rapidly increasing heat-related occupational injuries: the Americas, Europe and Central Asia. So, as I said, just building early warning systems is always good. Improving skills needs data networks, application of AI. Even if you dynamically downscale global forecasts down to 1 kilometer in your local area, you still need neighborhood scale information, which now can be effectively done with AI approaches and so on. The crisis, so I'm jumping text and just taking the most salient points. You can read the report. It's only about 25 or so pages, so you can easily read it. The crisis we see unfolding globally requires an urgent response. Deadly heat is becoming commonplace. Now is the time to strengthen global action on extreme heat. The world needs a strategy to deal with heat that serves to mobilize governments, policymakers, and all stakeholders to act, prevent and reduce heat risk, to increase resilience to heat, to manage extreme heat crises, and to mitigate its worst impacts. Again, heat waves are very local, impacts are very local, early warnings need to be hyper-local, but nonetheless global strategies on actions always help. So some recommendations I should read before we maybe stop this podcast, depending on how long it is. The crisis we see unfolding globally requires an urgent response. Deadly heat is becoming commonplace. Now is the time to strengthen global action on extreme heat that recommends concrete measures that can be taken now by governments and communities to ease the suffering of people everywhere while building resilient economies and protecting lives and livelihoods. Heat waves are not gender neutral, or the vulnerability of older people, women, children, and poor people always is higher. Supports so the recommendation of extreme heat action supports governments and communities everywhere by collecting good practices in policy and governance, risk reduction and management, and including the latest data and science on extreme heat. This is information that can help governments and their partners build resilience to heat risk and save lives. So whatever solutions you produce in one location can be transferred to other locations, so good practices can be moved around, including policy and governance, risk reduction and management. Identifies key areas of national and international cooperation to help address extreme heat risk. This is always an important and useful idea, especially in protecting. If India is, for example, making good early warnings for the neighborhood, can it share? Can it train people to use the early warnings and downscale locally for their regions and so on and so forth? So there is plenty of leadership roles for everybody. So how long am I here? 8 minutes, so let me go for, sorry for doing this, let me go for a few more minutes. Extreme heat, the science is fairly clear. Heat waves and prolonged periods of excess heat that accumulate over a sequence of unusually hot days and nights are increasing in frequency, duration and intensity and magnitude due to climate change. So lots of analysis have been done in many places. In India, it's, for example, as I said, large-scale background cooling may be happening, but heat wave duration, intensity, frequency, and the area covered increase, and there is a dependence on El Nino and La Nina and other natural climate modes, and you have also heat waves moving across the country from, let's say, southeast to northwest, which depends on combination of natural variability and global warming, and of course land use, urbanization, etc. add to the complications. Jumping ahead, in recent decades there's been a rapid rise in the scale, intensity, frequency and duration of extreme heat events against the background of rising average global temperatures. We tend to always think about global warming, and yet global warming pattern is complicated, and then you are superposing heat waves which have a dynamic and thermodynamic component. So heat waves can be generated locally, they can be advected in, or a wave, actual wave may come along, and so on and so forth. The IPCC is clear. There is high confidence that current heat waves and droughts have increased in frequency over the last century at the global scale due to human influence. The WMO, World Meteorological Organization, is equally blunt. Unbearable temperatures over 40 degrees C and even 50 degrees C are increasingly frequent in many parts of the world. There are references given that you can follow up. So 2023-24 of course have been monumentally warm because of combination of global warming, El Nino, and maybe the Hangatunga volcano, underwater volcano that went off in 2022 and threw up a lot of water vapor, which is a strong greenhouse gas. June 2024 was the 13th month in a row of record global temperatures. So lots of local records have also been broken. Extreme daily temperatures of 50 degrees C or more, July 2023 to July 2024. So the report just came out. So 53.9 degrees C on 7th July 2024 in I chopped off Death Valley, USA, and in Tepache, Mexico it was 52 degrees C on 20th June 2024, 50.4 here in August in Morocco, and across India here you have Churu, India, 50.5 degrees C. Pakistan and the Middle East are always hot spots, so you have Abadan, Iran, Jara, Kuwait, Sindh, Pakistan, Sanbao, China, and so on. So that's a lot of places with greater than 50 degrees C during 2023 to 2024. Okay, so oops, did I muck that up? I probably did. So I'll come back and fix it. So we'll see you in the next podcast. Okay, this is an important topic and we can always debate about how to go about this, but a global action plan and transferable solutions is always a great idea. Okay.